you have the bottom line. Morning. There's a chat function. You can see in the chat function, if you click on that little speech bubble, it brings the chat up on the side, and you'll notice in there that our agenda is now in the chat if you're wanting to know what we'll be doing as we go through today. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming along for this 90-minute health and care across the life course theme meeting. As you know, we have a meeting in between the ARC vests where we try and do more of the business rather than the presentation of what we're doing. And welcome and thank you very much, everybody, for attending. I know you're very busy and lots going on and lots of things happening, so it's much appreciated. So I'm just going to run through. I can't move the slides, can I? So you need to do that. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So some housekeeping. Please don't be on mute when you're trying to speak, because we all love saying you're on mute. But if you're not speaking, can you please stay on mute so that we don't hear the people drilling through your walls and the dog strangling the cat, etc. You may find it helps as if you keep your camera off when we're not in small groups, because lovely to see you, but if you want to speak, please put your camera on. If we're in small groups, please put your camera on because it makes it more like a meeting. But for people who are struggling with the broadband, which many of us do, it helps if there are fewer pictures on the screen, so turn your camera off, which can help with that bandwidth problem. Please use the chat function to introduce yourselves when you're speaking or you're in a group. And please feel free to use the chat function on the side, as I was saying about that bubble, to network. And if you want to speak, either use your hand raised, which is also on that where it says reactions. You'll see that in reactions there's a raise hand bar, and if you press on that, like I've just done now, you'll see that a hand comes up on my picture, and it means that we can see in our list of participants who's wanting to speak. And if you want to see who's attending, you can click on the participants button, as you can see there. I'm probably not showing my screen, is it? So I'm doing lots of things as reactions and things which of course you can't see. And you'll see that the participants are listed on the participants function. Dorcas. Pallavi could click on that right now and you'll be able to see that that would come up. Next slide, please. You can also use the chat to say, can I speak, please? So what we're going to do today, we're going to update on the theme. Paul and Fiona are going to talk about the Library of Lived Experience. Then Dorcas is going to introduce pre- and postnatal mental health. Paul Moran is going to talk about the COVID generation. Clarissa is going to talk about mental health in older adults. And then we're going to have an update on the national priorities work that we're doing for implementation work. Then we're going to go into breakout rooms, and then we're going to come back at the end and talk about what we found in the breakout rooms. Hopefully it's an interesting day for you, an interesting meeting, and many thanks for attending. Next slide, please. So I'm going to do a quick update, running seamlessly in from one bit to the next. As you know, we have these 6 sub-themes: family and children, adolescents, working age adults, older adults, cross-generational and marginalized groups. And I think I'm right in saying, Pallavi, that we now have leads for all of these. Is that right? Or are we still looking for one between the cross-generational and marginalized? I think it's the marginalized groups we're looking for, isn't it? Because I think Mari Lloyd-Williams is now doing the cross-generational.
Yes, it's just the marginalized now.
So if there's anybody who would be interested in either leading or co-leading the subgroup on marginalized groups, and there's migrants, people who are living without a stable home, such as rough sleepers or people who are couch surfing or living in hostels, people with addiction issues, anything like that, what we call marginalized groups, and you have an interest in that, then please do get in touch with myself, Clarissa, one of the co-leads, Joe, Paul, Dorcas, or Pallavi, and express an interest, and we'll talk to you about that. Next slide, please. So, as you can see, we're busy. So this is just in this theme, we have registered, not all of them are active, 85 projects in the 2 years since we launched. We have 26 projects that have external funding. We have 9 PhD studentships and 8 internships. And 2 bits of news. One is that we've just launched an internship round, which is, for those of you that remember, the Clark is a bit like the Partner Priority Program internships that we used to have in the Clark, in that they are to support people who want to lead and run a small project. So very relevant for some of our public advisors, or indeed people who are working in our member organisations. And the other bit of news is that we heard yesterday that we have indeed been successful in getting the funding to support increasing the capacity for mental health research and implementation research in mental health across the Northwest Coast area. And we'll be collaborating with colleagues and other ARCs across the North in particular around this. So over the next 3 years, we'll be running programs of mental health projects and supporting early career researchers and small projects from our member organisations of the public. A bit like, for those of you that remember, the PPP, but very much with a mental health focus. Well, there may be room for some other projects working alongside those as we set that program up. So that's really good news. It's significant funding to be able to run that and support that expansion. So that's great news that we got yesterday. Next slide, please. Other funding news is that so far in this theme, we have tapped into around £8 million worth of pandemic-related funding. So there's one particularly large long COVID trial I'm going to talk about very briefly. And we've also got over £500,000 worth of non-COVID funding, grant funding into the theme since we started. Next slide, please. So the long COVID trial is called Stimulate ICP, and we're very heavily involved in that from the Northwest Coast area. There are 5 co-applicants on the bid, which is led by a colleague of mine in London from UCL called Professor Ami Banerjee, who's a cardiologist there, and it taps into the developments that UCL led very early on in developing their new way of managing long COVID, which is an enhanced app and a personalized app with some physiotherapy support to help people on their recovery from long COVID. And we're comparing that to the standard NICE recommended approach. There are a number of people in, as I say, in the Northwest Coast linked into the ARC who are involved in this project. I lead the work package 3, which is around health inequalities and how we can cross-fertilize between this study and other ways of doing enhanced intermediate care for chronic conditions. Caroline Watkins from UCLan is one of the co-leads of the trial, and the clinical trials unit at UCLan is the clinical trials unit running this particular project. So there are 6 sites across the country trying to recruit around 1,000 people at each site, and it has expected to be finished by August 2023. So a big rush on to get this done and lots of work happening. So I won't say any more about that, but as I say, we're very heavily involved. Next slide, please. So publications. So as an ARC as a whole, I think we're now up to around 140 publications published since we started 2 years ago. And over a third of these are from this theme. So we're doing really well. Not only have we got 52 papers published, but we've also got 15 that are either submitted or are close to being submitted for publication. So amazing outputs, and we'll hear about some of those today. And I think that's the last slide. No, it's not. So this is a slide showing all the different organizations that are participating in the work of this particular theme. Many of you are here today. Next slide, please. Yes, that's right. Sorry. Summary of where we're up to. So we set out in the bid for the theme, which we revised. We became a research rather than a cross-cutting theme, a number of short-term objectives. And we believe that all of these have been completed. And indeed, we've just had our second report feedback, annual report feedback from the NHR, and they agree that we are green. So we have achieved the objectives as we said we would. So knowledge exchange, capacity building, building on the Clark Northwest Coast work and co-developing research from that Clark work. Those have all been completed. Next slide, please. Our medium-term aspirations and objectives are as shown here, to develop our research program and support external grant applications. And we are co-developing proposals that come from our member organisations of public advice through to the baseline outline stage, which is what you tend to see in this meeting or at the ArcFest meetings, where we talk about proposals that we've developed to a basic level, which we then prioritise, both within the theme, and then that prioritisation list is sent out to all the member leads from all 62, who then score them. And then we bring back the ones that achieve the threshold for prioritisation. And we're also actively building engagement and collaboration. So the core work of the theme, building on what's already been prioritised, we have research development networks. So we have one on coastal seaside towns and communities, which has some sub-themes. And we also have a social care theme, a research development network, and we also have a community mental health research development network. And those are all building grant applications that are in areas that we've already prioritised as a theme to lead on. And of course, as you know, Clarissa has the, which we'll be talking about, the Dementia and Aging, Liverpool Aging and Dementia Forum, which has got a very active programme and is the equivalent of a research development network, although it was existed before the ARC. Next slide. I think we're now going to move on to theme presentations. So thank you very much. And it's now Paul and Joe looking at the Library of Lived Experience.
Hello, my name is Paul Marshall. I'm a Research Associate at the Spectrum Centre for Mental Health Research at Lancaster University. Today I'm going to be talking about a project we've recently started at Spectrum called the Library of Lived Experience for Mental Health. A library of lived experience, which is sometimes called a living library or human library, is an event that aims to provide people with the opportunity to share some important aspects of their life experiences. So at the event, people, sometimes called human books or living books, offer the opportunity to interested readers to speak openly about some aspect of their personal experience in kind of open conversation. This kind of event has been held in the past in a range of settings, including in healthcare education, in community settings, and in public places, usually with a specific focus on challenging prejudice through dialogue between groups who would otherwise perhaps not have the opportunity to meet and have conversations. So an example of this kind of event is one held at Bolton in 2016. So this was run by staff at the NHS Trust there, with the goal of helping to facilitate a kind of deeper understanding of the issues experienced by people who may experience stereotypes and prejudices, for example, those linked to faith or gender or disability. And the evaluation showed largely positive feedback, and as mentioned by this healthcare assistant here, this kind of event has shown that there is a potential to change people's perspectives in important ways, for example, by promoting or understanding or promoting empathy. You know, as this person said here, it helped them to see things from the perspective of people with learning disabilities, despite the fact that they'd worked with them for some time. So why would this be useful to be explored in the context of mental health? Well, I think there's an increasing recognition of the value of lived experiences in mental health, for example, through the training of peer support workers. And there is an increasing focus on the voice of patients and members of the public in research and in policy development. I think that reflects a growing recognition that these lived experiences are actually a form of expertise. And there may be a benefit in offering a more flexible approach to the involvement in research and in delivery of healthcare services and mental health. It could be perhaps more appropriate for some people. So if you think, for example, full-time carers may not have the opportunity to develop full-time paid roles or voluntary roles that take up quite a lot of time. And there might be some roles that draw on lived experiences, but not in the kind of direct way that some people might want. So it might be that somebody with an experience of a mental health problem wants to tell the direct story of that life experience to try and help other people, and feel that has been a meaningful way to use those past negative experiences. And so the library of lived experience might be one way to do that. And we know that from research evidence that these kind of events are feasible, that there's been some small-scale positive evaluation, but there are a number of challenges with that literature. It is quite limited, and we do need to understand the specific mental health context as well. So it's quite easy to think of some potential positive outcomes, but there could quite easily be some potential negative outcomes for people sharing mental health experiences in quite an open setting. So it's important to really appreciate the context in which this kind of event could be delivered, to proactively address and perhaps encourage some of those more positive outcomes, but also on the flip side, look forward and try and reduce some of the potential negatives through proper planning and consultation. So what we aim to do with our study is to develop a theory of how a library of lived experience might work by using an approach called Realist synthesis, which essentially asks how does an intervention or service work, for whom, why, and in what context. And at the same time as this, we'll run workshops based on a model called experience-based co-design, which will involve people with a range of mental health experiences, including service users, families, staff in the NHS and staff in the voluntary sector. Will help develop a specific implementation plan for a library of lived experience in the north of England. And this is because we've been funded by the NIHR's Research for Patient Benefit Mental Health in the North call, which is a response to the relatively low research focus in our region, which has quite relatively high mental health needs. So the way in which we're going to do that is kind of summed up in our research design here. So the core research team at Lancaster University will be guided by an expert group with lived and professional experience of peer support in mental health. And in our first work stream there, in our theory development work stream, we'll look at the existing literature of what's been done before, but we'll also conduct interviews with people who've taken part in these kind of events, people who've organised these kind of events, and perhaps even commissioners of services, to really help us understand those key contextual factors that could determine whether or not people experience these kind of events in positive or negative ways. And then parallel to that, we'll run a multi-stakeholder workshop events, which again will draw on diverse experiences in the north of England, in particular, from service users through to family members, even NHS and voluntary staff, to help us come up with a more direct plan for how this can be carried out. Then ultimately that will help both of those work streams in the project will help us to develop that implementation guide based on our theory or underlying ideas about how this kind of thing might work. So there are a number of ways to get involved with this. So if you're interested and it sounds like something that you might like to contribute to, you could take part in one-to-one interviews if you've got experience of a living library or similar events. You could take part in the co-design process, which is planned to take place kind of from the end of the year onwards through to the summer. And also, if you know somebody who's interested in this kind of topic in mental health service design and delivery, please feel free to pass on my email address there. I'd be very grateful if you could do that. So thanks very much for listening, and like I said, get in touch if you've got any other questions or queries about this. Thanks.
So we next have Dorcas, our co-lead for the HaCaL theme, and also as a public advisor, and she'll be talking about depression in childbirth.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak this morning, Olavi. I'm a midwife, retired midwife, and I've worked as a midwife for 35 years. And so I've been involved with women that have suffered from childbirth depression, which is divided into two really, like antenatal and postnatal. And as a mother as well, I know what it feels like to be a bit, have emotional problem when you've just had a baby. Next slide, please, Pallavi. Depression in childbirth can be antenatal during the pregnancy or prenatal, when the baby's been born. And sometimes they call it the baby blues. And we used to tell the mothers that it shows on the third day is the blues. And what happened then is that, you know, with the hormone, during the pregnancy, the hormones go up. And when the hormones go down, then the mothers might feel a little bit emotional, saying, you know, I'm not doing this right, I'm not doing that right. And that's why postnatal depression, people talk more about that than the antenatal one, really. Antenatal depression can happen at any point during pregnancy, whereas the postnatal depression might start about the third day after the baby is born. Next slide, please. The prenatal depression is a mood disorder with the woman and with having anxiety, fatigue, which may make it difficult to care for themselves or others at extreme sadness. Postnatal depression can start with a short time case of baby blues, as I've explained before, from the third day. But when it's going to about 12 days, 14 days, one has to be careful that the woman might be having postnatal depression. And it can lead to psychosis as well if it's not treated very quickly. Thank you. Next slide. I just want to change the view. The signs and symptoms of antenatal and prenatal depression can manifest as follows. Unusually, a month of worry about giving birth and parenthood, an emotional discharge, angry, irritable. The mother, you can see them, they will say, well, I don't want to feed the baby at the moment, can you help me? They become so anxious, they can't sleep. Sometimes they're full of energy, and when they get home, they have no interest in sex or loss of interest in themselves and the pregnancy. Next slide, please. Causes of antenatal depression. There are other things that may play a part in antenatal depression. The previous miscarriage, you know, when the mother started this miscarriage, people think it's something they can cope with, but it stays with you forever, and you feel that, you know, you've lost something, you've lost the baby. Or sometimes when they've had a difficult childbirth before, like forceps delivery, or they have a cesarean section, and their expectation is to have a normal delivery. So, can you see me? I can't see myself. Hello?
Yes, we can. I can see you, Dorcas.
Okay. I can see myself on this laptop. And the history of depression might be one of it. Unexplained pregnancy, isolation, poor support. If in their own house they have stressful living condition as well. For example, if there is a sort of abuse in the house, it doesn't have impact on the antenatal period. And during childbirth experience and post self-esteem. Next slide, please. Many women react to childbirth, and there are many signs and symptoms. I can't cover everything because it's a broad subject. I'm putting two subjects into one this morning. So if you want to find out more, just Google postnatal antenatal depression. They feel sad, low mood again, loss of energy, feeling tired, don't want to do anything. They just want to go to bed, and lots of appetite, or they eat more. Having negative thoughts about, am I a good mother? Am I a bad mother? I'm feeling anxious that something may happen to the baby. Next slide, please. The treatment could include the following: counseling and talking therapies. I don't know if you know about talking therapies. They have it in Liverpool, and it gives you a chance to talk to people, to open up to somebody you don't know, and that might make you to feel better. And you know, one can be referred by the GP to the talking therapies as well. Medication. A lot of mothers might feel, oh, I don't want to take antidepressant, but sometimes it relieves them of that symptoms as well, and that makes them to be able to cope during the postnatal period. Next slide, please. For postnatal depression, the treatment depends on the severity, because if it's just the blues, right, we can support them as midwives or the doctors, or the family should support them, because some of them are new moms, darling. They're just like maybe first baby. But when it's becoming a bit severe, psychotherapy can be used as well, but antidepressants is recommended. And this is important, that the mothers don't just stop it, because if they stop it, then they end up in postnatal psychosis. And this will lead to antipsychotic mood stabilizers, and benzodiazepines can be used. And sometimes they need ECT. So it is important to nip the bud from the beginning, from the antenatal period. Make sure that they're all right. Otherwise, when they have the baby, it becomes so worse. Next slide, please. Well, to conclude, really, sorry if I'm rushing it, because I've only got 10 minutes. It is important for the health workers, GPs, to be able to pick this. Midwives, we are more close to the mothers, and obstetricians to watch out among the pregnant mother and offer advice and support. Early diagnosis is group prognosis anywhere. So if it's diagnosed in time and treated in time, then we can reduce the psychotic state. Mothers should be signposted to local activities and baby and moms. They are everywhere. Local national child at the NCT, they have antenatal teachers, postnatal leaders, breastfeeding counselors, and you signpost them to the local ones within the area to make sure they have connection with other mothers. That's important. Next slide, please. Anyway, that's just the end of my presentation. Although it's a rush, well, because I only had two days to prepare it, but never mind. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you've got any view, you can say that at the breakout, and thanks for listening. Thank you.
Thanks, Dorcas, and also thanks to Paul Marshall for your presentations. Please could I call on Paul Moran, our Deputy Co-Lead, to talk about mental health in adolescents.
Thanks, Pallavi. Hopefully you can hear me. Few technical difficulties this morning, but
yes,
hopefully you can hear me fine. So morning, everybody. My name's Paul Moran. I'm one of the public advisors and currently the co-lead on the HaCaL theme. I'm going to try and do a live presentation for you today, so hopefully it holds up. I'm here to talk to you today about a research proposal idea I'm looking to start up to highlight the impact the pandemic's had on young people's mental health, and to talk to you about the concept of the COVID generation. Some of you may know, who know me, know I run an amateur boxing club in my local community, and as well as coaching the kids that come through the door. Over the last couple of months, and definitely through the pandemic, we've been playing more of a role of a mentor to these kids. I'm concerned about the well-being of many of our patrons when they're outside of our club. The closure of clubs and support networks for children during the pandemic, some of which will never open back up again, has had a massive impact. And I think we're at the very edge of a mental health epidemic amongst some of our young people, and it's going to be a large problem for society over the next years to come. What am I hearing on the ground? Well, a lot of it's about economic and social inequalities for the COVID generation. It's recognised that the pandemic's had an impact on everyone, but the hardest hit has definitely been young people. People from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, young people living in poverty have been hit massively. My ward's in the bottom 10% in the country for poverty, unemployment and long-term health conditions, and the pandemic's definitely exacerbated many of these problems. I just want to pick out a few things that have impacted kids, and I know this is backed up by a study from Youth Access that's been published in the last year or so. Digital poverty, not something I've ever thought about before, but a lot of kids don't have access to the internet outside of the school. During lockdown, when kids were at home, homeschooling, this was impossible for many. Ofcom's technology tracker found that up to 2 million kids didn't have access to a laptop or a computer, and approximately 3 million, or three quarters, had mobile data, but up to 500,000 had no access to the internet at all. And if you were a family of 4 kids with one device, just having to prioritise lessons based on need and age was difficult. All that leads into education inequalities. It's generally thought that children in state schools are now 18 months behind the more affluent peers. And evidence suggests that poorer students are more likely to be underpredicted at A-levels than peers from more affluent backgrounds. The postcode lottery of scores that seen by many in the past 2 years really affected people. And this has affected kids in my boxing club. And 3 of them certainly think their scores at A-levels were impacted due to the pandemic, and they fear for the future opportunities and lack of career options. This is backed up by the Equalities Act review in June 2020 that showed the teacher assessment reward system may be biased against those from disadvantaged backgrounds, and in doing so, I quoted, structurally limited equality and access opportunities, perpetuating a vicious and unbreakable cycle. And who knows what employers are going to think about these grades in years to come, and the people that have been taking these exams in the past couple of years. Next topic, poverty. 4.2 million children currently living in poverty in the UK, and that figure's rising. People from the BAME, disabled and migrant children are disproportionately impacted by poverty. And we've seen that in kids stopping coming to our boxing classes. When we've caught up with the parents, the reasons have been that they literally can't afford a £1 fee for a 1-hour session. We got these kids back in for free, of course, and this just shows the tight margins that some of the families are working to at the moment. The Joseph Ramsey Foundation found that 40% of renters have had to reduce income and have less money to spend on the basics such as food and bills. The pandemic's seen a massive increase in short-term placements in foster care, and Bernardo's fostering service have seen an increase of 60%. And young people in care do find it more difficult in education. They find it more difficult accessing apprenticeships and a lot less likely to go into higher education. Employment. Young people aged 16 to 25 have felt the worst impact in the pandemic in terms of employment. A lot of jobs that have been lost in the retail and entertainment sectors, they really suffered, and they're far more likely to be furloughed and not able to go back to work from home. This obviously has been exacerbated when businesses then haven't opened back up after the pandemic. Proprius, the Youth Prevention Society charity, I've seen a higher number of contact from young people with fears that impacts of reduced or removed income. And young people in the northwest and northeast have been hit worst, and the unemployment has been expected to increase as the impact of furlough really hits over the last couple of months. Even young people who've pushed through to higher education are going to see a reduction in graduate and entry-level positions in big companies as companies tighten their belts. I have 2 young lads in our boxing club that have had to stop college courses and try and find work as their parents couldn't support them due to their lost jobs, and they now fear that their ambitions have stopped and career ambitions ended. Income and debt. Some families on low incomes, young people and people from the BAME backgrounds who are considered to be seeing in work in poverty have been hardest hit during the pandemic. Nearly 18 million people have turned to some kind of credit or debt to get through the pandemic, and the charity Step Change has seen a big upsurge in 18 to 24-year-olds contacting them stating that the pandemic was the reason for their debts, and 40% of them have often run out of money before the end of the month. Benefits. In August 2020, nearly 4.6 million households were receiving universal credit, and then 90% increase in a year, which is just unbelievable. And that was bound to have risen again in 2021. 1 in 3 under 25-year-olds, with Liverpool and Blackpool being 2 of the worst hit areas. And the removal of the £20 uplift in benefits has seen more than 750,000 families plunged into crisis, according to the Fabian Society. In 2019, it was thought that there was 135 children either homeless or in temporary accommodation. This figure doesn't include kids who might have been sofa surfing or living with friends or living with family. And obviously, the pandemic is going to have absolutely going to have impacted these figures. According to the government figures, up to 1 million families have fallen behind on rent, council tax, utilities. And I think we all know that the ask on food banks has become enormous, with even working families needing to rely on regular support. This is all happening now today in our communities. And no matter what your job, your social standing, your race, your religion, your skin colour, your beliefs, all families are being impacted in some way as part of this. There's many impacts on young women, young black people, youngsters from the South Asian communities, the LGBTQ plus communities that I haven't called out today. And you know what, I could speak on this topic all day long if you let me, but Palabi won't. So if you're a young person that's seen the test results marked down due to the postcode you live in, your further or higher education opportunities taken away, your career hopes and dreams banished, and your family plunged into poverty, who are you going to look to for support? How can a young person stay positive these days, and how can they look forward to the future and break free from this COVID generation that they found themselves in? I don't know. I haven't got all the answers. But I do think it's definitely worth us researching some of the main topics and getting some feedback from young people in the Northwest. What am I going to do personally? Well, I'm hoping to bring a voice to these young people. We've started some seldom heard voices groups, which Selena's been running and will continue to revisit. We can consider the voice of the young people at all times in all projects that we run, but specifically some of the smaller groups that were being disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. We can seek out young people to become public advisors and let them share their experiences and concerns, and maybe we can get some projects starting to look at the impacts on the COVID generation. I've recently started to be a mentor for a couple of new young people that have joined our public advisor group, and I'm looking forward to adding to that group over the next couple of months. I've started to look into the research that's being done in the pandemic, and I hope I can find some common themes that I can look into further. So what can you do? Well, you can join me to form a team to build a research bid to look closer into mental health in young people, and more specifically, probably 16 to 18 year olds. I feel as though this age group is sometimes fall through the gaps. Sometimes too old for some of the solutions that child services can provide, and maybe too young for some of the adult social care support that's in there. But all have suffered due to some sort of issues highlighted in the presentation that I've done today. So please feel free to contact me if you are interested in joining the group, either through Pallavi and the HaCaL theme or via my email address, which I'll put in the chat in a little while. Thanks for your attention today. I hope that was useful, and please feel free to contact me with any questions. Thanks very much. Pallavi, back to you.
Thanks so much, Paul. Very interesting, and there's a lot of things that you mentioned there which I wouldn't have known otherwise. So I think thank you very much for mentioning that. This makes us more aware. Clarissa, could I call on you to give your presentation on mental health in older adults, please?
Yeah, sure. Let me just share screen. And change the settings. So I hope you can see the full screen now. So I'm going to share today, share with you today some of our mental health focused research in the older adults sub-theme. It's drawing upon some of the research I've been highlighting in previous meetings, but I've tried to really pick out the mental health elements of the various projects that are going on. And again, these are not all the projects that are going on across the ARC Northwest Coast, just kind of a selection, just to kind of get us thinking about mental health in older adults. So I'm going to specifically talk about some of the mental health related findings on research on dementia in the community, on care homes research. There'll be an international focus as well, because we are doing some international collaborations specifically in low and middle income countries. There's a focus on the social care workforce, which seems to emerge quite a bit in the recent months, as well as looking at carers, both paid and unpaid carers. And again, it's just to kind of give us some ideas what we might think about when we think about mental health in the older population. So our research study looking at how the COVID pandemic has affected people living with dementia and family carers in the community. So that study finished data collection last year, but it particularly highlighted different elements of how people with the condition, but also their loved ones, have been affected emotionally, and how their mental health and mental well-being has been impacted. So we noticed a lot of carer anxiety. So again, to remind us, we collected data in the first 2 months of the pandemic last year, but even afterwards, when we spoke to our public advisors, there remained that notion of anxiety, whether their loved one with dementia would be able to go back out into the community, go back out, access the services, and generally noticing that their loved one with dementia was deteriorating much faster. And all these unknowns well, increased that care anxiety. We also noticed a lot of loneliness. And just to highlight as well, we collected qualitative data, but we also did a longitudinal survey. And in that survey in particular, we also included older adults without cognitive deficits. So we specifically asked in that survey, how are you feeling? How are you accessing services, etc.? And we noticed that the sudden closure of services out there in the community, such as support groups or activities that they'd normally go to, walking groups or, I don't know, yoga classes, anything, that really was related to poorer mental well-being. And many people highlighted that level of loneliness and generally that lack of support. Particularly with dementia, we noticed in the family carers that because that outside, that external type of support was suddenly withdrawn, that led to family carers taking on additional caring duties. Thus, for many, increased carer burden and stress. Again, that's leading to mental health problems and mental well-being difficulties in family carers. So the carers and family members are a really important population to consider as well when we think about older adults. And we also noticed, quite sadly, when we read those transcripts and conducted those interviews, that in the follow-up interviews that we've done, many people living with dementia, but also family carers, expressed their feelings of depression and said, I'm so depressed, I've actually gone on to using antidepressant medication. I've remotely engaged with my GP and I'm now on antidepressants. So we could really see within the span of a few months how the pandemic has impacted on people's mental well-being. Now, I know we're slightly emerging now out of the pandemic, but these are likely to have long-term impacts on older people and on people with dementia and family carers. Also, we're currently conducting a systematic review with colleagues in Germany and Australia and across the UK to understand more broadly what's the evidence out there, how have people with dementia and family members, family carers been impacted by those restrictions. And as part of this, we're also looking at how their well-being and how their mental health has been impacted. So we're hoping to finish that just before Christmas. So that should be interesting. We currently have around 160 papers we need to read through, so a lot of evidence is out there. Care homes is another focus of the research that's going on in this sub-theme, and I have referred to our COVID care home study in previous meetings, but I just want to draw out here the mental health focus, mental health finding again. So we showed in our study, the data of which we've also compared with Dutch data, that safe care home visitation wasn't enabled. So when we collected data in October, November last year, and again in March this year, again via qualitative interviews remotely, we found that no safe care home visits were allowed, or very rarely when there was an end-of-life focus. Because of that, both family carers noticed when they had those alternative visits via Windows or pod visits or remotely via FaceTime, but also some care home staff noticed that the residents, many of them experienced poorer mental health. Some of them stopped eating. They were so upset about not seeing their family anymore, but also many of them couldn't understand why they couldn't see their family anymore. So that's in terms of resident mental health, but in terms of family carer mental health, what we noticed in the span from October, November to March is that the negative feelings that were first upset and frustration of not seeing their loved one in the care home quickly turned to anger in March, because all of them that we followed up were fully vaccinated, were adhering to guidance, etc. But the care home staff was not necessarily fully vaccinated or vaccinated at all, yet they still noticed that the virus was entering the care homes. So there was this frustration and anger. I'm okay, I'm vaccinated, why can't I see my loved one? But then there's this care home staff member sitting next to him or her during a visit they might have the virus. So again, that led to breakdown in communication as well. But let's not forget care home staff. So we found, interviewing care home staff, that there's been no mental health support provided. Only a couple of those members of staff said they had received some sort of support from their care home managers. But overall, the mental health of staff seemed to be neglected. And just to kind of pick out again, those are some of the key findings we had in that COVID care home study, and mental health was featuring as one of the key ones. And again, yes, it's COVID findings, but these findings, and particularly the lack of mental health support and lack of support in the social care workforce, will have long-term implications that go beyond and outside of the pandemic. So in terms of our international work, looking further afield, we are working with colleagues in Colombia, Uganda, and India. Specifically in Colombia, we're having a standalone project looking at the impact of stressful life events. So that's the pandemic, but also political upheaval, violence in the past, how that's impacting on the mental health of older adults. And some of the early findings already indicate that things that have happened quite a while back in that political lifetime of Colombia is still having quite a lot of negative mental health impacts on older people. And also we're looking at the long-term psychological impacts of the pandemic on older adults in low and middle income countries. And just one of the key findings, because our collaborators have done an amazing job collecting an awful lot of data, but one thing that struck me when reading through some of those transcripts in English was that older people in those countries seem to be more concerned about accessing basic necessities than reflecting on their mental health. So many people were saying, we don't have enough money, we can't buy enough food, we can't afford, some of them, 3 meals a day or even 2 meals a day. So people weren't really reflecting much on how negative they might feel. And that's in contrast to the UK data we collected with older people, where there was really much more eloquence about, oh, I'm feeling down, etc. So I'm just going to whisk you through a couple of things to really give you some food for thought about all the different angles that we're looking at. And looking at, again, this is something that came up on Wednesday at the 3rd annual Liverpool Dementia Conference. We held breakout rooms, and we looked specifically in one of them, looking at the social care workforce. So picking up again what I was talking about before, the international work. And so we talked about the mental health there. As you can see here, staff doesn't receive adequate mental health support. But we also found more broader issues that weren't right at the moment, or haven't been right for a really long time in the workforce. And for example, working conditions more broadly, lack of career pathway and trajectories, etc. Many people might have double caring roles as well, which will lead me on to the next slide in a minute. So just to kind of highlight, there's lots of issues that seem to be wrong in the social care workforce, and the lack of mental health support is one of them. So if we look on the next slide here, just to kind of highlight, and I must say it's really difficult to get a good picture of formal carers that's not protected. So I took a medication picture. So just to kind of highlight, when we talk about mental health and think about mental health in the older adult sphere, we really need to consider the people that are caring for the older adults as well. And too often, well, both types of carers are being neglected, but on the whole, informal carers in general are completely overlooked, not just mental health wise, but generally they're not receiving enough value, and I can't think of the English word now, but recognition. They don't receive enough recognition, although we know, for example, in dementia, they provide roughly around £14 billion worth of care a year. but they're not being supported enough. But then equally, as we've shown in our research, formal carers, so people going out into the community, in people's homes, or people working in care homes, the conditions are poor and they're not being supported. So let us all think about the people that are supporting older people as well. And I think that's it from me, and I hope I haven't overrun. Thanks, Pallavi.
You're fine, Clarissa. Thanks for that. We're next going to have a presentation by Catherine Berzins. It's basically an update on the ARC national priorities. So I'm just going to share a presentation she just sent to me.
This is a background and summary of progress to date about the Adult Social Care and Social Work Research Programme led by the ARC in Kent, Surrey and Sussex. So they developed 10 priority areas, and the one we're talking about is topic 9, which is using community resources to improve wellbeing. And ARC North West Coast proposed work based on 2 local initiatives, the Life Rooms and Community Connectors, which are both social prescribing services based in Liverpool. Life Rooms is run by Merseycare, so it's NHS, and Community Connectors is run by Sefton Council for Voluntary Services. They were both evaluated as part of the Clark North West Coast Partner Priority Programme, and recommendations from the evaluation suggested that further work could support the development of an implementation plan for scale-up and expansion of these models. So ARC North West Coast put forward some proposed work based on these projects with an implementation focus to ARC KSS, and at the same time ARC West Midlands put forward proposed work based on community-led support, which is a strengths-based approach currently used in about 30 local authorities across England and Scotland. So the first draft synthesising these 2 areas of interest was produced yesterday, and the aim is to evaluate community-led support and community connectors, the Life Rooms, as an approach to embedding strengths-based practice within the adult social care system to inform the development, monitoring and activity of future services. And they've proposed this is done using 3 work packages. The first one is to assess and evaluate community-led support using Realist methods, working with the NDTI, who have implemented this approach in a number of local authorities. Work package 2, which is the one we would do, is to review and assess the experience of using community-based, strengths-based approaches in social prescribing, to identify transferable learning for applications in social care, comment on social prescribing as policy develops, especially as to how it works with social care. And then work package 3 would synthesise the common learning from work package 1 and 2 regarding wider implementation of community strengths-based approaches. So looking in a bit more detail at work package 2, the objectives would be to review existing evidence of effectiveness and implementation of social prescribing approaches, emphasising community involvement, develop a logic model and implementation package, assess perceptions of effectiveness and implementation facilitators and barriers, and then draw out lessons for strengths-based approaches in social care. This would be done initially with a literature evidence review that would come up with an initial logic model. This would then be followed by qualitative data collection, interviews with stakeholders structured around this logic model to test the hypotheses and fill any gaps, and develop pen portraits of services to illustrate this. And then this would be followed by a nominal group technique exercise looking for the key features of implementation. And the outcomes will be a logic model and implementation package. Work package 3 would synthesise the lessons from the first 2 work packages, and the potential impact and expected outcomes of this would be that there would be a focus on practical steps to improve implementation, summary insight guides, a detailed system map and guidance for voluntary and community sectors, and planning further projects to ensure the guidance maximises impact. In terms of public involvement, they have suggested an MPP advisory panel, local advisory groups across the participating ARCs, involving people with lived experience as part of the research team, and steering group consisting of stakeholders, including service users and staff. Having looked at this first draft, some immediate thoughts that I've had are that we need to ensure that the work plan is novel, that it addresses health inequalities and the different organisational contexts and referral pathways. And Mark had suggested that we could test the implementation package to look at enablers, barriers, fidelity and key impact indicators. So that's where we're up to as of today, and we will discuss it further this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine, for that update. We're going to move now to breakout rooms for further discussion on the topic of mental health. Anne, can you please start the breakout rooms, open up the breakout rooms? Thank you.
Not sure where Anne is.
Well, we had two groups, didn't we? So our group has been around for some time.
Yeah.
And that looks like the other group's come back. We've lost some people, yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, good. Okay. So we're just going to sort of give a brief overview of what we kind of talked in the different rooms. Should I go first? So in our room, we basically looked at, it was mainly focused really initially on mental health in older adults and in children. There was digital literacy that was brought up basically for people who are older, as we've talked about before, Clarissa talked about during her presentation, but it's not only for the older people, it's also for, you know, access, and that's what Paul talked about. Not everyone has access to a laptop, so how do we get these people, how do we get better access to these kind of things? We did touch upon intergenerational, and I think this is something that we need to talk about more, because from what I understand, not everyone thinks so much about what about those people who are sitting at home, who are working at home. We can't go into the office. What about their mental health? And I think that's something that we need to discuss more about. Elaine, who was in our group, brought up a really interesting sort of situation where, not situation, but it's basically a sort of a group where before the pandemic, older people used to support young mothers, but after the pandemic happened, it flipped, and the younger people are helping the older people, some sort of a group, a cafe sort of thing. So that's really interesting. That was really interesting to hear that something like that was actually happening. And also we talked about the mental health of personal carers, so not the paid, not the professional carers, but personal family carers. What about their mental health? And that's what we touched upon as well. And we did touch upon marginalized groups, and maybe need more support from the voluntary sector, and we need to look into that in the future. Mark.
Yeah, I think I'm going to feedback Paul Harvey. So just a couple of themes. I think everybody really enjoyed the sessions today and all the presentations, so that was really good to hear. A number of people spoke about different things that are happening in the communities at the moment. So Graham was talking about some work that he's doing around young people and how that can really thinking about mental health and other things. And Graham, you can probably articulate this better than me, but how it can really help in later life. So, you know, what can we do with young people today that helps later in life, especially kind of, you know, looking at the end of life care that potentially people get. And Pippa also discussed some great work that, you know, she's doing and a call next week, I think, with some school nurses and, you know, conversations with school nurses and kind of maybe plugging us into some of the things that, you know, maybe I was talking about, that can bring some real life examples about the impact that the pandemic's had in schools and some of the issues that you know, nurses and teachers are seeing on a daily basis off the back of you know, some problems across the pandemic. But really good discussion. Everybody seemed to be really engaged, and a few people will be getting involved in different topics and conversations as we go through. Thanks, Pallavi.
Thanks, Paul. I'll hand it over to you, Mark. Go on.
Yes, thanks. Really interesting. I hope you found it worthwhile. Some really interesting talks. I hope you agree today, and gives us a sense of what we're doing and what we're planning to do. The purpose of bringing everybody together, as I was saying in our breakout room, is that really what we're hoping to do is to provide you with an overview of what is our current activities are, or some of them, around mental health. And hopefully that will encourage you to go and look at our website and the web pages for our theme, and to express an interest in engaging with one or more of the teams that are delivering or planning or developing projects within our theme. The core objective is always to do work that has the potential to reduce health inequalities. And the underlying principles is that we always think about equity in the way that we do our work, and that it's all about co-production and building capacity. It's not about giving a project to some academics who come back with an answer in some period of time. It's not about academics walking off with a pile of money and bringing something back that may or may not be what you expected. It's about working collaboratively, bringing together the public with academics and the workforce across health and social care, identifying what the problems and solutions might look like, what a research question would be, and then developing the project and delivering the project together right through the process of that, through to writing the papers together at the end. A lot of what we do is either quite contained and therefore linked, for example, to an internship, and I'll talk briefly about that in a minute, or it's about developing an external grant application, because one of the things that we really want to use the art to do is to bring together high quality teams that cover areas that other teams may not, and that are attractive therefore to people awarding grants who say, we want to invest in this because we think this is closer to the action and will deliver something in a relatively short period of time that will make a real difference, so that we stand out from the Oxfords and Londons of this world in our ability to do that. So we want to be developing competitive grant applications, and sometimes we'll need to do some development work to be able to do that. So our role in these meetings is to bring the team together, and the people that come to our meetings, if they see a gap, say, oh, actually, I need to contact so-and-so to bring in, because that's a gap we've got, and they'd be really good for this, so I'll go and talk to them. So that we do that together, and we sort of snowball to get the dream team together, and that we co-produce the proposals. At the moment, there's a call out for interns. We've just launched that beginning of this week. And this is a mechanism whereby, using some of our money and some of the employer's money, if it's an employee, on a 50-50 basis, we're able to buy out up to a day a week of somebody's time to be able to work on a project, implementation of innovation, or evaluating an innovation, for example, or developing a grant, or a fellowship application. And it's that buyout time, and part of that is that their line manager says, I guarantee that I will protect this time, and put that in writing, and we will put the wraparound support around that. So that's something that I please share with your colleagues if you have some interest. And that links into what I also announced earlier, that we have this mental health capacity building funding, and there'll be more about that coming out through the ARC in the coming weeks. But we'll be setting up, as we did in the Clark, some partner priority program type initiatives where teams can come together around topics and work together, supported by ARC staff, to develop and deliver projects or grant applications. So hopefully you've all found things of interest today, and hopefully we'll be joining or encouraging colleagues to join some of the work that we're doing. And if you are aware of colleagues who would be ideal for participating in some of the things we're talking about, please do tell them about us and encourage them to come along. And they can do that by emailing us through the website, for example, and we'll point them in the right direction. Debbie, I saw your hand up.
No, sorry, Mark. I was just clapping everyone for the presentations.
Ah, okay. I didn't see the hands moving, but it's a corner of my eye. Sorry. Any comments? Any questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. It's been a really useful day. I hope you all agree. Thank you for your time. Look forward to seeing you at the ArcFest in December. And please do get in touch with us and get in touch with Pallavi or the sub-theme leads. And do encourage your colleagues to come along to the next meeting and come along to the ArcFest, and hope to see you there. Bye, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you. Bye. Oh, yeah.
I was going to say, can I ask the team members to stay on?
Yeah, of course.